My name is Walter Hayes. I'm 71 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that if you worked hard enough and sacrificed enough for your family, they'd stand by you when it mattered. I was wrong. The first sign came while I was lying in a hospital bed. 3 days earlier, I had collapsed while repairing a fence on the north side of my farm. It wasn't a heart attack, according to the doctors. Just exhaustion, stress, and a warning that my body wasn't as young as I wanted to believe. When I woke up after a long night of tests, I expected to see my son sitting beside me. Instead, I heard his voice in the hallway. "Once the transition happens, we can restructure everything," another man answered. "What timeline are you thinking?" "Depends on how quickly things move." I frowned. They weren't talking about my recovery. They were talking about the farm. I couldn't hear every word, but I heard enough. Ownership, management, transition. I stared at the ceiling and told myself I was misunderstanding the conversation. After all, Eric was my son, the same boy I had carried on my shoulders through cornfields when he was 5, the same boy I coached in Little League, the same boy I had rescued from financial disaster more times than I could count. Surely I was mistaken. A few minutes later, Eric walked into my room. He smiled. "Hey, Dad." I waited for him to ask how I was feeling. He didn't. Instead, he pulled up a chair and immediately started talking about the farm. "How long are the doctors keeping you?" "Another day, probably," he nodded. "What about harvest planning?" I blinked. "Harvest?" "Yeah, somebody needs to be making decisions." I laughed awkwardly. "I'm still alive." "Son, that's not what I meant, but..." Something about the conversation felt off. Stayed less than 15 minutes before leaving. I watched him walk out of the room and felt a strange emptiness settle over me, not because he left, because he seemed more concerned about the farm than about me. 3 days later, I returned home. My farm sat on 600 acres of land that had been in our family for 3 generations. Every fence post, every grain silo, every tractor, every field. I knew them better than I knew most people. After my wife, Margaret, died 4 years earlier, the farm became my reason to keep moving. Without it, the house felt too quiet. Without it, grief had too much room to grow. For 48 years, Margaret and I built everything together. She handled paperwork. I handled the fields. She kept me organized. I kept us growing. When cancer took her, half of me disappeared. The farm was what remained. That was why I worked every day, not because I needed the money, because I needed the purpose. At first, things seemed normal after I returned home. Then little changes started appearing. Small things, easy to dismiss. Eric ordered new equipment without discussing it with me. When I asked why, he said he was helping. A fertilizer contract was changed again. He said he was helping. Several suppliers started calling him directly instead of me. Every time I questioned it, he gave the same answer. "You need to slow down, Dad." At first I appreciated the concern, then I noticed it becoming a pattern. Every conversation somehow ended with retirement. Every discussion somehow led back to succession planning. Every visit somehow turned into a conversation about the future of the farm. One evening, Eric and his wife Sandra came over for dinner. Halfway through the meal, Sandra looked at me and smiled. "You know, Walter, you've earned a break." I shrugged. "I like working. You don't have to keep carrying everything yourself." Eric nodded immediately. "She's right." I set down my fork. "Carrying what?" "The farm," I laughed. "The farm is doing fine." Sandra exchanged a glance with Eric, a quick glance, but I noticed it. Then she said something that made me pause. "Have you ever considered assisted living?" The room went silent. For a second, I honestly thought she was joking. I looked at Eric. He didn't laugh. He didn't even look surprised. Instead, he said, "Maybe not right now, but eventually." I stared at both of them. "I'm 71. Sandra smiled politely. "Exactly." That conversation stayed with me long after they left, not because of what she said, because of how naturally she said it, as if the idea had already been discussed, as if it wasn't the first time the topic had come up. A week later, things became even stranger. I attended a family barbecue at my cousin's house. Halfway through the afternoon, my cousin David pulled me aside. "How are you feeling?" "Good. You sure?" "Of course." He hesitated, then he lowered his voice. "Eric said you've been having memory problems." I felt my stomach tighten. "What?" He seemed worried. For several seconds, I couldn't speak because I knew something. David didn't. I had never forgotten a meeting, never missed a payment, never lost track of farm operations. My memory was fine. So why was Eric telling people otherwise? That night I sat alone on my porch watching the sun disappear behind the fields. For the first time in my life, I felt uncertain about my own family. Not angry, not suspicious, just confused. I kept searching for innocent explanations. Maybe Eric was overprotective. Maybe Sandra was worried. Maybe everyone was simply reacting to my hospital stay. But deep down, something didn't feel right, because concern usually sounds like concern. This felt different. This felt organized. And what I didn't know yet was that those rumors were only the beginning. Because while I was trying to understand what was happening, my son was already making plans for my farm, plans that didn't include me. The next few weeks changed the way I looked at my family. Not because of one big event, because of 100 small moments that slowly added up to something I couldn't ignore. After coming home from the hospital, I went back to my normal routine. I walked the fields every morning. I checked equipment. I met suppliers. I handled contracts. I wasn't as strong as I had been 20 years earlier, but I was still fully capable of running my farm. That didn't stop Eric from bringing up retirement every chance he got. "You need to slow down, Dad." At first I thought it was concern. Then it became advice. Then it started feeling like pressure. One afternoon, I stopped by the local feed store. An old friend approached me. "How are you doing, Walter?" "Just fine." He nodded. "Good." Eric seemed pretty worried. "Worried about what?" He hesitated. "Your memory." I felt my stomach tighten. There it was again. The same word. Memory. I forced a smile and changed the subject, but the conversation stayed with me all day. A few days later, another person mentioned it, then another, then a cousin, then a neighbor. At that point, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. Someone was spreading that story. And deep down, I already knew who. The worst part wasn't hearing the rumors. The worst part was realizing people were starting to believe them. A fertilizer supplier called Eric instead of me, regarding a contract renewal. A banker asked whether Eric would be attending future meetings. Even relatives began discussing farm decisions with him before talking to me. It felt like I was slowly disappearing from my own life, like people were preparing for a future where I no longer mattered. Then one afternoon, Eric showed up carrying a folder. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. Just some routine paperwork. I opened the folder. The first few pages looked harmless. Then I noticed several phrases that immediately caught my attention. Management, authority, operational control, decision-making. Right, I stopped reading. What exactly is this? Eric leaned back in his chair. Just legal paperwork. I continued looking through the documents. The papers didn't transfer ownership directly, but they clearly moved control closer to him. I closed the folder. "I'll let my attorney review these." The change in his expression was immediate. "You don't trust me." I looked at him calmly. Trust and signatures are two different things. At that moment, Sandra walked into the kitchen. She folded her arms. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "No," I replied. "I'm making sure I understand what I'm signing." The room fell silent. Eric grabbed the folder and stood up. For the first time in his life, my son looked angry because I had asked questions. That bothered me. Because concern doesn't become anger when someone wants clarification. Control does. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. Family gatherings started happening without me. Decisions were made before I even heard about them. More and more people treated Eric like the future owner of the farm. Then came the announcement about the farm's 50th anniversary celebration, a huge event. Neighbors, business partners, bank representatives, former employees, relatives, practically. Everyone connected to the farm was invited. Eric insisted on organizing everything himself. At first, I appreciated the effort, but something felt wrong. The entire event seemed less like a celebration and more like a presentation. As the date approached, my uneasiness grew stronger. Then one evening, everything changed. I walked into the equipment shed looking for a tool. Inside, Eric and Sandra were talking. Neither of them saw me. "The announcement is going to be perfect," Sandra said. "What if he refuses?" she asked. Eric laughed. "He won't. And if he does, he'll look ridiculous." They both laughed. I froze. "Announcement? What announcement?" Then Eric spoke again. "Once it happens in front of everyone, he'll have no choice." My heart sank. Suddenly everything made sense. The rumors, the paperwork, the retirement conversations, the assisted living suggestions, the pressure, the celebration. All of it was connected. This wasn't a family event. It was a strategy, a public strategy. They wanted to create a situation where I would either agree to give up, control, or look unreasonable in front of everyone who mattered. I quietly backed away before they noticed me. That night, I sat alone in the farmhouse long after midnight. For months, I had been making excuses for them, convincing myself they meant well, telling myself they were only worried about me. But now I knew better. This wasn't concern. This wasn't protection. This wasn't love. It was control. And for the first time, I allowed myself to consider something I had been avoiding. What if my son wasn't trying to help me? What if he was trying to take the farm? The thought hurt more than I can explain. But once it entered my mind, I couldn't ignore it, because every piece finally fit together. The hospital conversation, the dementia rumors, the paperwork, the public announcement, all of it pointed toward the same goal: control of the farm. That realization changed everything. I stopped looking for excuses, stopped searching for innocent explanations, and I started searching for the truth. Because if my instincts were right, somewhere there had to be proof, and I was determined to find it. The morning after that conversation in the equipment shed, I walked into Margaret's old office with a different mindset. For months, I'd been trying to prove myself wrong. Now, I was trying to prove my instincts. Right, I started opening filing cabinets that hadn't been touched in years. Margaret kept everything: contracts, property records, tax documents, legal agreements. If there was a piece of paper worth saving, she had saved it. Hours passed before I found what I was looking for. At the bottom of a drawer sat a thick folder labeled Succession Planning. Inside was a notarized agreement Margaret and I had signed years earlier. I sat down and read every page, carefully. Then I read it again. One clause immediately caught my attention. No ownership transfer could happen without my written approval and an independent legal review. Neither requirement had been met. My heart started beating faster. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a while: hope. The next day, I contacted our family attorney. He confirmed what I already suspected. No transfer had been approved. No legal succession process had begun. Then he told me something else. Several months before my hospital stay, Eric had contacted him asking questions about ownership changes. Months before anyone claimed to be worried about my health. That was all I needed to hear. The concerns about my memory had never been the reason. They had been the excuse. Over the next few weeks, I quietly collected evidence, certified copies of the agreement, emails showing Eric communicating with potential buyers, written confirmation from the attorney. I didn't argue with anyone. I didn't confront Eric. I simply prepared. Then, the anniversary celebration arrived. The farm was packed. Neighbors filled the property. Business partners shook hands. Former employees shared stories. Everyone seemed excited. Eric looked especially confident as the afternoon continued. He stepped onto a small stage near the barn. He smiled at the crowd and tapped the microphone. The conversation stopped. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "today isn't just about celebrating 50 years of success. It's about looking toward the future." People nodded, continued. "My father has decided it's finally time for the next generation to take over." Applause. started spreading through the crowd. Then, he said the words he had been waiting months to say. I'll officially be assuming leadership of the farm. More applause followed. That's when I stood up. The crowd slowly grew quiet. I walked toward the stage holding a folder in my hand. Eric's smile disappeared. When I reached the microphone, I looked out across the audience. Friends, neighbors, family, people who deserved the truth. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said calmly. The crowd became silent. I opened the folder. First, I showed the certified succession agreement. Then I explained the approval requirements. After that, I presented copies of emails showing Eric had contacted potential buyers long before my health scare. Finally, I read the attorney's written statement confirming no transfer had ever been authorized. The reaction was immediate. Faces changed. People exchanged looks. Whispers spread across the crowd. Suddenly, the story everyone had been told no longer made sense. The retirement conversations looked different. The dementia rumors looked different. The assisted living suggestions looked different. Everything looked different because now people understood the truth. This had never been about helping me. It had been about controlling the farm. Turned toward Eric. He couldn't even look at me. Then I made my final announcement, effective immediately. Eric will no longer be part of the farm's succession plan. The silence deepened. The farm will be placed into a protected trust, managed by an independent board. I paused. Future profits will fund scholarships for young farmers who want to build something of their own. Then I looked directly at my son. You thought this was punishment. I shook my head. It isn't. It's consequences. Nobody applauded. Nobody interrupted. The truth was enough. Within days, the rumors disappeared. People stopped questioning my judgment. Business partners returned to working directly with me. The story Eric had spent months building collapsed completely. 6 months later, I stood outside the farm office beside the first scholarship recipient. Behind us, tractors moved through the fields. Young farmers participated in training programs funded by the trust. The future of the farm was secure. As I signed the final trust documents, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since Margaret passed away. Not because I had won, because what we built was finally protected. The people who deserve your legacy aren't always the people expecting to inherit it. Sometimes they're the people willing to protect it when there's nothing in it for them. A few weeks after the trust became official, life on the farm settled into a new rhythm. For the first time in months, the phone calls stopped. The questions stopped. The rumors stopped. People no longer looked at me with concern. In their eyes, they looked at me the same way they always had as Walter Hayes, the man who built the farm, not the man who was supposedly losing control of it. One afternoon, I was repairing a fence near the south pasture when a pickup truck pulled into the driveway. I immediately recognized it. Eric. He stepped out slowly and walked toward me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The wind moved through the fields around us, the same fields where I had taught him how to drive a tractor, the same fields where we had worked side by side when he was young. Finally, he broke the silence. Dad, can we talk? I set down my tools. Go ahead. He stared at the ground. I made mistakes. I didn't answer, because we both knew that wasn't the whole story. After a long pause, he continued. I thought I was protecting the future. No, I said calmly. You were protecting what you thought should belong to you. His shoulders dropped. For the first time, I saw something I hadn't seen in months, not anger, not entitlement, embarrassment. He knew the truth now, the same truth everyone else knew. The farm was never threatened by my age, it was threatened by greed. I never wanted things to end like this, he said quietly. Neither did I. That was the hardest part. People think betrayal hurts because of what you lose, but sometimes it hurts because of what it forces you to see. I hadn't lost land, I hadn't lost money, I had lost an illusion. The illusion that loyalty automatically follows blood. Eric stood there for another minute before nodding. Then he turned around and walked back to his truck. Didn't stop him. Some lessons can't be taught through Arguments, they can only be learned through consequences. Months later, the scholarship program continued growing. Young farmers came from across the county to learn modern and traditional farming methods. Every time I watched them work, I felt proud, not because they would inherit anything, because they respected what they were being given, and that made all the difference. One evening, just before sunset, I stood beside Margaret's grave. The sky above the farm glowed orange. I told her everything. The rumors, the betrayal, the trust, the scholarships, and the future we had protected. For a long time, I stood there in silence. Then I smiled. Because for the first time since she passed away, I knew the farm would survive without becoming a source of conflict. It would continue doing exactly what we built it to do, helping people, feeding families, creating opportunities. The legacy was safe, not because I gave it away, because I protected it. And as I looked across the fields one last time that evening, I realized something important. Family is not defined by who expects your legacy. Family is defined by who respects it, and sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to hand your life's work to someone who believes they are entitled to it.